Hello. So I am Asha. I use user pronouns, and I am located in the Onondaga people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as New York, outside of Rochester, New York. And I'm recording this with a bit of angst because I went live on Instagram and talked about what I want to talk about. I'm going to talk about now. And Instagram didn't allow me to post it. So that's cute. Thanks, Instagram. I have a feeling that it was because I used words like menstruation, bleeding, white supremacy, cis. I don't know why it was. Just censorship, I guess. I don't know. So, what I spoke of was I guess it's my journey in a way. It's my journey, and it's not just my journey. So I'm speaking in a way to a result of the dominant culture, which locating myself, I am white. I am was assigned female at birth. I have a bachelor's degree. I am documented. I'm a citizen of the United States. English is my first language. Grew up middle class. I have other privileges as well. I have some neurodiversity, neurodivergence. Mostly able-bodied, relatively able-bodied most of the time. And I identify as non-binary and pansexual. And being socialized as a girl and as a woman led to certain programs that I've since, claiming being non-binary, have been able to look at, examine, deconstruct, question, and that's been really empowering. I'm someone who has experienced body dysmorphia for as long as I can remember. And body dysmorphia is a distorted image of one towards oneself and their body. And what that manifested for physically for me is like a picking of the skin, and it didn't manifest so much as a eating disorder as disordered eating. And I don't want to spend too much time about that now, but I name these things because I know many people in my intimate circle, my close circle of friends who identify as cis women, and we've spoken about these, how socialization has impacted these parts of ourselves, and ways of body image stuff, but also a deep disconnection from our body. And I read an article that I'm not remembering the details of recently, but this article was talking about how dominant culture, Western culture, white culture, patriarchal culture, colonialism, settler culture, heteronormativity culture, that all of that, that it disconnects us from our bodies. So in so many ways, we're so up in our head like all the time that, in what I've received from yoga and the practice of yoga over the past 6 years and 5 years that I've been a teacher, is that it brings us back into our body, and that's immensely powerful. That's why I really love the practice of yoga. That's why I teach it, believe in it, offer it. And what this article was articulating so beautifully, I'm going to try to link it below, is that when people who have been socialized in this culture teach modalities such as yoga. We are taking a teaching that is not part of the culture of all the things that I just listed, and we're bringing it, and we are teaching it in a way that it's inseparable then from the culture in which we have been socialized in and programmed. And something happens in that journey, which is why I'm a strong supporter of follow and educate yourself from South Indian, like Southeast, like Indian, like people who come from the culture of whatever modality it is that you're learning. If you're learning acupuncture, then you should be learning from people who grew up and are immersed in the culture of Chinese medicine, which is people in China. As soon as you transplant these practices, they then have a way of becoming whitewashed. So educate educate yourself on where your practices are coming from. And this matters because specifically what I was talking about and want to talk about here is that especially for people assigned at birth assigned female at birth, there's a way in which we are totally disconnected from our bodies and that we are rewarded for that. And I'm speaking from what I experience here, but I'm also hearing that this type of socialization happens for people assigned male at birth, disconnected from their bodies, and it's not okay to cry. Boys don't cry. The only feelings that are valid are like anger and machoism. And this isn't unique to the United States. You see this across the world. But speaking in my lane of someone who is assigned female at birth, that these are very deep social conditionings, and it disconnects us from the energy and the wisdom that is residing in our bodies. And this is a statement that I think is true no matter what gender identity you associate with yourself. The trouble is, and this is where we get to that, the practices are beautiful and they're helpful, but they're also existing in a culture. The trouble that I've experienced, and I have inhabited really, really beautiful spaces of divine feminine spaces, which is interesting. As someone who identifies as non-binary and uses these/her pronouns, doesn't use she, her pronouns any longer, that I'm inhabiting these spaces and there's deep beauty there. And one of the beautiful things that I'll name and want to talk about more is fertility awareness and menstrual cycle awareness, and just deconstructing the shame and the all the feelings around not being able to talk about bleeding. Deeply colonial, deeply patriarchal. As far as I know, it might be very white too. Deeply part of the culture. And something that it's been beautiful over the past few years that I've seen is that that's being deconstructed. I am wearing my Thinks right now, period underwear. Like, this is just becoming more and more normalized. In the comfort of my home, I've been free bleeding for years. It turns out Madame Gandhi has did that, running marathon or triathlon or something. Like, people who identify as women or people who bleed have been deconstructing a lot of this shame and blame, which is immensely powerful. And at the same time, we see a pushback. So as someone who falls under the trans umbrella, I don't personally identify as trans because I'm not drawn to medically transition, but other people say that non-binary is under the trans umbrella. So okay. It deeply offends me and hurts me when my trans siblings, trans women, are not invited into the spaces that for some reason I'm invited into for this divine feminine whatever. And it can be subtle. So sometimes it's not as overt as you're not welcome here, right? But the language in books, I have received immense education and empowerment through reading The Garden of Fertility by Katie Singer. It taught me how to turn deeply inward, to know my body, to know my pelvic bowl, and to know my cycle. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Uma Dismore Tully, incredible book, Yoni Shakti. She does much better, in my opinion, of being trans inclusive. And, you know, she's a cis woman. Another book that I found immensely powerful in my journey was Wild Power. Highly recommend that book. And the authors are seeking to be trans inclusive, non-binary inclusive. And, they're cis women. And in these spaces where menstruation is talked about and celebrated, it is often like sort of there's this big controversy of like, you're erasing women and trans women aren't real women because they don't bleed, and like non-binary, like, we're erased. And what hurts about that is that my liberation is interconnected to all people who identify as women, trans women, not like white cis women, black cis women, Asian, like all women, all people who bleed, all people who identify as women, someone who doesn't identify, like, all of this is connected. And I have found immense power in learning about my cycle, and yet I'm still othered in these spaces, and that hurts. And it perpetuates body dysmorphia. So speaking from my experience, I read these books, right? And I don't experience dysphoria around words like womb or vagina or yoni or any of that. But the pronouns and the women and that's the language that I'm like, well, are you talking to me? Because I don't feel like you are. And I feel as though, so I don't, I don't fit in that world, and then I don't fit in the non-binary trans community. I feel sometimes, this is my experience, because I'm someone who loves bleeding and loves having a cycle, and had an IUD for like 13 years, like a long time, from the time I was 14 to maybe 10 years. Maybe I just, okay, 10, we'll call 10 years. Through my yoga practice, my IUD just expelled itself. I didn't want it in the first place. I left a domestic violence situation. I had gotten it for him because I didn't want to get pregnant, and when I left him, it just sort of like, it left, and I was like, okay, well, don't need that anymore in my cervix. And then proceeded to learn my menstrual cycle. And for me, that has been a process of learning myself deeply and learning where I'm at and how I'm feeling, and tuning in every single day to how my waters are moving, how I'm feeling in my lunar energy and in my solar energy. When I'm closer to day, my cycle is somewhere between like 26 days and 32 days. When I'm closer to day 24, 26, I'm like, I don't want to be on technology. I'm just like over people. I really just want to be in nature or alone or with my cat. And that's my life. The first day of my moon, I now take off from as much as I can and just lay on a heating pad and like luxuriate in the pause, the sacred pause. And as I'm closer to ovulation, which for me is around day 13 to 15, I have more energy. I'm more active in my solar energy, which for me is that like external higher energy. Like I am willing to go out and interact with people that I don't know, and be sociable and have conversations. All of that. Be on technology and do a whole bunch of work. Quite frankly, in all the many ways that I'm serving. That's that's closer to a certain part of my cycle. So what I've done I started learning my cycle in July of 2019. What I've done over this amount of time is really get to know myself, and that has been immensely empowering because it means that no one outside of me, as my previous partner, would tell me who I am or what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling. And when I turn inside now and I check in with my body and my rhythm and how my energy is moving, no one outside of me can tell me anything that I don't like. I can feel what's true. And that, I wish that for everyone. And in the trans and non-binary community, that looks different for different people. There are people that, even listening to this video, would be like, so you use the word vagina and I'm out, or womb, I'm out. So what my work has been in the past year or so is writing and creating material for trans, non-binary, gender expansive people, but also people who identify as male, because so much of this deeply coming into residency work has been done by, at least in the experience and the resources that I found, by cis women. And they're using language that excludes people who I don't identify as women, or people who are not biologically women or biologically having menstrual cycles. And to me, that's just a shame. And more deeply than than shame, a shame, like, gosh darn, is our liberation is intertwined. So when we're creating content, and I like, there are spaces that, like, I believe in affinity groups, Black women deserve to have their own space. Cis women, what are you scared of? Why are you excluding folks? I will link a great discussion on that, better than I can articulate, somewhere below. White affinity groups, there's a space for that, because there are conversations that white folks need to have that Black folks, they deserve the choice. That's what affinity or a caucus is. They can come in and hear what's going on and be in that space. It's not like you're not welcome here, but a space dedicated to learning for white folks. When cis white women tell me that they need that space, it's not because they're trying to learn how to be more inclusive and unpack their biases. It's because of those biological, like, reasons of claiming affinity to womanhood at the exclusion of other people. So when I say that our liberation is connected, it's because it is. The work that I'm doing, and other people are doing too, I know there's other people that are doing it, is intent on expanding these deeply energetic practices of resiliency. I always turn to nature, because there's no urgency in nature. And what learning my cycle and learning my body and turning inward to my energy rhythms has done for me is disconnect from that entanglement of cultural urgency and, again, all that cultural smorgasbord. And everyone deserves this, every person deserves gender affirming care. And the cis woman who had a mastectomy deserves space and yoga language and yoga postures that affirms them, and meditations that affirm the person with a hysterectomy, or the woman with a prostate. Every person deserves to be met with language that affirms who they are and the path that they're walking. So those are the thoughts that were not welcome on Instagram, apparently. I'm interested in creating community. I am interested in collaborating, and I'm continuing to work on, I'm a writer, so I'm continuing to work on that, of gender expansion, and just deep gratitude and debt to the emotional labor of the Black women who have come before me. I recently took a training with Michelle Cassandra Johnson and Stephanie Ghostin Paul. I think that's her name. I'm really bad at names. I apologize. As well as Tristan Katz, who is not a Black woman, is a non-binary trans white person with they them pronouns, and incredibly in debt to that space because race and gender were present together. In debt to Marsha P. Johnson, Black trans activist who was murdered, but also rioted and is, I feel, one of the transcestors who is the reason that I have the rights that I enjoy today as a white non-binary person in 2021. There's a lot of legislation happening in multiple states right now, criminalizing and marginalizing trans people. This matters deeply. If you consider yourself an ally, please get involved. Please speak up. Please pay trans and non-binary people for our emotional labor, just as Black leaders deserve to be paid for their emotional labor. Our liberation is connected, and I really welcome questions around this. Maybe nothing I said is controversial, maybe it is to you, but I believe that if we have a conversation about it, that I will understand where you're coming from more deeply, and that you might understand more deeply where I'm coming from too. So, great gratitude to the lineage, our ancestors, all of our relations, and thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Be well, dear ones.